I think I didn't do anything wrong. Just tried to be kind. My ex had nowhere to go, and I didn't want to be cruel. But now I'm sitting in my childhood bedroom, staring at boxes with my name on them. The ones my husband packed before changing the locks. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. It started with a phone call I almost ignored. Ryan's name flashed on my screen one Tuesday evening, the same name I'd sworn never to see again. He said he was in town for a few weeks, that his lease had fallen through, and he just needed a place to crash. His voice was soft, careful, like he already knew he was asking too much. I told him I'd think about it, but before hanging up, he said, "You were always the kind one, Dahlia." That line worked better than it should have. When I told Mark about it over dinner, he stopped mid-bite. "You mean that Ryan?" I nodded and said it wasn't a big deal, that I couldn't just ignore someone in trouble. He said Ryan had plenty of friends. I said most people turn their backs when others need help. He said, "There's a difference between help and invitation." I laughed and told him not to be insecure. He didn't laugh back. Later, I called Paige. She said I was doing the right thing. "You're married, not heartless," she said. "Besides, he'll be gone in a few days." I repeated that line to Mark, hoping it would sound reasonable. He sighed and said, "If you're asking, you've already decided." I told him he was being dramatic. Ryan arrived 2 days later with one small duffel bag and that same confident smile. He hugged me like we'd just seen each other yesterday. When Mark came to the door, Ryan stuck out his hand and said, "You're the lucky one." Mark shook it but didn't smile. The air in the room shifted. I told them both to relax, that it was just temporary. That night, while I set up the guest room, Mark leaned against the doorway and said, "You really think this is a good idea?" I told him I wasn't about to kick someone out on the street. He said, "You think he doesn't know exactly what he's doing?" I told him to stop assuming the worst, that compassion doesn't have to mean guilt. He said quietly, "Sometimes it's both." Ryan kept to himself the first day or two, or at least that's what I told myself. He offered to cook dinner as a thank you. I said that wasn't necessary, but he insisted. When Mark came home to the smell of garlic and laughter, he looked like he'd walked into someone else's house. I told him Ryan was just showing gratitude. He nodded, tight-lipped, and ate in silence while Ryan told stories about old memories that made me laugh more than I meant to. Before bed, Mark said, "You don't see what this looks like, do you?" I said he was overreacting, that he'd thank me later for proving people can stay friends. He turned away without answering. I lay there feeling proud of myself for being the bigger person, not realizing I'd already opened the door to something I couldn't close again. Within a week, Ryan had settled in like he owned the place. He woke up late, made coffee in Mark's favorite mug, and left his shoes by the couch even though I'd told him not to. I tried to keep everything light, told Mark it was temporary, told Ryan not to worry about the tension. But the air in the house changed. Mark spoke less every day, moving around us like a guest in his own home. I told myself he was just being cold because he didn't like sharing space. Ryan had that easy charm, the kind that fills every silence. He'd linger in the kitchen while I worked on my laptop, teasing me about my serious face. I laughed too much, even when I knew Mark could hear from the other room. When I asked Ryan about his plans for moving out, he shrugged and said he was still figuring things out. I didn't push. I liked the energy, the attention, the stories, the feeling that someone actually saw me again. Mark tried to talk to me one night after dinner. He said this arrangement wasn't working, that he felt like an outsider. I told him he was being dramatic. He said, "You're defending another man in my house." I said I was defending kindness. He asked if I even wanted him here anymore. I said, "If that's what you think, maybe you should leave." The look he gave me after that, it wasn't anger, it was resignation. He nodded, said, noted, and went to bed. The next morning, Ryan joined me on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee. He said I shouldn't let Mark's mood ruin my generosity. "You're just doing what good people do," he said. I smiled, grateful for the validation. When Mark left for work, Ryan asked if I ever missed how things used to be between us. I said, "Don't start that." He laughed, said he was joking, but his eyes didn't look like it. Paige came over that weekend. She said the house felt more alive now, that Mark was always too serious anyway. I told her she was right, that Ryan reminded me what laughter sounded like. We spent the evening talking, drinking, playing music while Mark worked late. When he came home, the 3 of us were in the living room, and Ryan was strumming a guitar he'd borrowed. Mark stood in the doorway, quiet. I called for him to join us. He said maybe another time and went upstairs. After Paige left, I found Ryan in the kitchen shirtless, rummaging for a snack. He turned, grinning, said, "Guess I should cover up before your husband comes down." I laughed, but my stomach tightened when I saw Mark standing at the top of the stairs, watching. No words, no yelling, just that same unreadable calm. I opened my mouth to explain, but he walked back into the bedroom and closed the door. That silence was louder than any argument we'd ever had. The following days felt like walking on glass. Mark barely spoke to me, barely looked at me. He'd leave early, come home late, eat in silence. Ryan noticed, of course. He said I shouldn't let Mark's mood swings control my peace. "You did him a favor," he said one morning, while leaning in the kitchen doorway, "and now he's punishing you for it." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe I hadn't crossed any lines. At the design studio, people started asking quiet questions. One coworker, Lisa, mentioned she'd seen a man leaving my house early in the morning while she was walking her dog. "Your husband?" she asked. I smiled too fast and said yes, of course. But the lie felt sour in my mouth. Later that day, I scrolled through social media and froze. Ryan had posted a photo of my garden, the one Mark built, captioned, "Good things come when you least expect them." My name was tagged in it. When I got home, I told Ryan to delete it. He laughed, said it was harmless. I said Mark could see. He shrugged. "Then maybe he'll finally talk to you." I told him he was making things worse. He said I was overreacting, the same word I'd used on Mark a dozen times. That night, Mark came home while Ryan and I were eating leftovers at the table. I offered him a plate, but he shook his head. He looked exhausted, not angry, just finished. I asked what was wrong. He said nothing. I pushed, and he finally looked at me and said, "Do you even see how far you've let this go?" I said he was twisting it, that Ryan had nowhere else to go. Mark looked at me for a long time, then said, "Everyone has somewhere else to go when they want to." He walked into the guest room, grabbed a few of Ryan's things and carried them outside. Ryan jumped up, telling him to relax. Mark said quietly, "Get your own place." Ryan turned to me for backup. I froze. Mark looked at me one last time and said, "You made your choice." Then he left the house without another word. The next morning, the guest room was empty. Ryan was gone. His bag, his shoes, even the mug he'd been using, all gone. At first I felt relief. Then I found the note on the pillow. Didn't mean to cause trouble, but it was fun while it lasted. My hands trembled as I read it. By noon, I saw that he'd deleted the photo and his entire account. My stomach sank. I tried calling him, but the number was disconnected. When I told Paige, she said maybe it was for the best. "Now, you and Mark can fix things." But when I got home, Mark's closet was half empty. His wedding ring sat on the counter beside a folded piece of paper that said only, "Don't worry about dinner. I won't be back." For 2 days, I kept telling myself Mark was cooling off. He'd done this before, gone silent when he needed space. But this time, the house didn't feel like a pause. It felt final. His toothbrush was gone, his laptop charger too. I sat on the couch staring at the blank TV screen, waiting for him to text, to walk in, to yell, anything. When nothing came, I called Paige. She said to relax, that he'd come back once he realized Ryan had left. "He just wants you to feel guilty," she said. "Ignore it." Ignoring it didn't help. By the third morning, the mail came with a thick envelope addressed to me in neat typed letters. It was from a law firm. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were separation papers and a list of documented incidents. The words blurred together. Emotional boundary violation. Compromised trust. Inappropriate cohabitation. Attached were photos. Me and Ryan on the porch laughing. Him shirtless in the kitchen. The tagged post he'd deleted. There was even a screenshot of the note Ryan left. I dropped the pages on the floor. I called Mark immediately. He didn't answer. I texted him, "We can fix this. Please just come home." Minutes later, his reply came, "I am home. You're not." That one line hurt worse than all the paperwork. That evening, Helen showed up without warning. She didn't ask to come in. She just stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "He told me not to get involved," she said, "but I couldn't let you face this blind." I asked what she meant. She said Mark had already moved into a short-term rental and filed for full separation. "He's quiet, Dahlia," she said softly. "Quiet people plan while everyone else performs." I told her it wasn't fair, that I was only trying to help someone. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You don't help a drowning man by letting him pull you under." After she left, I poured myself a drink and tried to calm down. I replayed everything in my head. Every conversation, every small decision that had felt harmless. I told myself Mark was overreacting, that this was punishment, not justice. But deep down, I knew. He'd warned me. He'd watched me dismiss his boundaries one by one until he had none left to defend. When Paige called later, I told her about the papers. She gasped and said, "Maybe I could talk him out of it." "You're married," she said. "He can't just erase that." I wanted to believe her, but the legal stamp on the last page told me otherwise. I went to bed in our half-empty room, staring at the imprint his pillow used to make. I thought of how quiet he'd been the last few weeks, how steady. I'd mistaken that calm for weakness. Now I understood. It was preparation. The first hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. I dressed carefully, wanting to look composed, respectable, like a woman who had simply made a misunderstanding worse than it was. Paige came with me, whispering that everything could still be fixed, that Mark wasn't the type to carry grudges. But when we walked into the courtroom, I could tell she was wrong. Mark was already seated beside his lawyer, posture straight, expression unreadable. He didn't look at me, not even once. The judge began by asking both sides for statements. Mark's lawyer spoke first. His tone was calm, professional, and precise, almost surgical. He described a prolonged pattern of emotional negligence and disregard for marital boundaries. He said Ryan Keller had resided in the marital home for 19 days, during which multiple witnesses observed behavior that compromised the trust between spouses. Then he handed the judge a folder. Inside were photos, timestamps, text messages. My phone buzzed on the table. I didn't even have to look to know Paige was texting me. "Stay calm." When it was my turn, I tried to explain. I said Ryan had nowhere else to go, that I was only trying to help. The judge asked why I hadn't arranged a hotel or called one of his family members. I said I didn't think it was necessary. Mark's lawyer cut in, asking if it was also unnecessary for Ryan to be in the house while Mark was working late, or for him to appear shirtless in multiple photos. I said those moments were taken out of context. The judge said quietly, "Context matters less when evidence speaks this clearly." Mark still hadn't looked at me. When he finally stood to speak, his voice was low but steady. I asked her to choose boundaries. She chose sympathy instead, he said. "I didn't want revenge, I just wanted peace." His lawyer then presented the separation terms, division of assets, sale of the house, and a clause transferring full ownership of our shared business account to him. It was all so clean, so final, I almost admired it. Afterward, when we stepped into the hallway, Paige turned to me and said, "He's serious." I said I knew. Mark came out a moment later with his lawyer, stopping only to sign a few papers. I asked if we could talk privately. He said there was nothing left to discuss. I told him he was being cruel. He said, "Cruelty is pretending you can keep love while disrespecting it." Then he walked past me without a glance. Outside, the air felt heavy. Reporters weren't there, just a couple of neighbors who'd shown up out of curiosity. Paige tried to lead me away, but I turned back once more. Mark was getting into his car, and for a moment, our eyes met through the window. No anger, no sadness, just relief. That, somehow, was what hurt most, realizing that letting go of me had given him peace. The final decision came 2 weeks later, delivered by courier on a grey morning. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope, knowing exactly what was inside before I opened it. The court had finalized everything. The house sold, the accounts transferred, my name removed from the deed. The last line said, "Possession of property to be vacated within 7 days." I called Mark, half hoping he wouldn't answer. He did. His voice was calm, almost gentle. I said he didn't have to go through with it, that I'd made a mistake, but we could rebuild. He said, "You let another man live here, Dahlia. You rebuilt already." I started crying, saying he couldn't just throw away years together. He said, "I didn't throw them away, I packed them for you." Then he hung up. When I got to my mother's house that evening, the boxes were already there. Labeled, sealed, delivered from the home that wasn't mine anymore. My mother asked if I'd finally learned something. I said I'd only tried to help. She shook her head. "You can't help someone by breaking the person who trusted you." I opened one box. On top was a note in Mark's handwriting. "You gave him a room. I gave you one too. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching."